at least good. And then we can get that from you, and we'll see when you have to leave what it does. So we'll see.
Boy, this is terrible. Nowhere does, I've been into this a lot, and nowhere does it give me the option to reassign.
That's fine. Why don't we leave it as it is, and we'll move forward despite technology. So Murphy's Law and I work real well together, unfortunately. So what I wanted to do was to, we'll see if this is recorded, but I suggest that people turn their microphones off and the cameras off, because when you get recorded, as we are recording, you'll find that the recording should be of the people that are speaking. So with the exception of Naomi and Stephen, once we get going, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. I'll be monitoring that and be sort of moderating that to give people a chance to ask their questions. We'll see how that goes. What would be helpful too is if you could put in the chat your name and your affiliation. I'll let you decide what you mean by your affiliation, just so we get some record of what we've got, who we've got here. Now, I've wasted enough time on technology, so let me do a very quick introduction to Stephen. I think you understand, well, know that he's president, CEO of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, and he led the 2014 decision by the fund to divest from fossil fuels. So he's got particular importance to what our conversations are now. And from the beginning, Steve has been devoting his career to strengthening democratic culture and institutions. He co-founded and served as president of Demos, a public policy organization that works to reduce political and economic inequality and to broaden citizens' engagement in American democracy. He's a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, a member of the Council of Foreign Relations, the China Council for International Cooperation on Environment and Development. Now, I could go on, but I've now wasted enough time to get things going. And the nice thing about this is that Stephen and Naomi are childhood friends. They've known each other for a long time. And it was really evident in the discussions on Monday that they have a good rapport and an excellent exchange. Now, you may know Naomi as one of our classmates, class of 74, but you also might know her from as a producer and co-writer of Fat Bear Week. So that's probably what she's most proud of at the moment. So with that, why don't I stop talking and turn it over to Naomi and to Stephen. And a reminder, please mute yourself so we don't have any other feedback. And I suggest turning off your camera, your video, and then we can save bandwidth. With that, Naomi, Stephen, you're up.
Hi, it's my great pleasure. And actually, Stephen and I can't stand each other. So, but we put on a good show. Yeah, very happy that Stephen could join us today to give us some background and maybe help us figure out, what path we might take to have some progress here. So, Stephen, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund divestment of fossil fuel investments was a big deal, considering the source of the fund's money. I have a question about, wouldn't divesting from people that you had been invested in limit the ability to influence and engage them in conversations? So, two-part question here. What were the advantages of divestment, and what brought you to the decision to divest?
Well, thank you, Naomi, and thanks, Bill. And it's great to be with all of you. I'm also a member of the class of 74, but at a different institution. I graduated from Yale while you all were graduating from Stanford. Pleasure to have this conversation. So, in our case, the decision to really begin the journey about decarbonization was based on the fact that this foundation, predating my tenure here, which began in 2001, so in the late 1980s and early 1990s, had already become a leader in work on climate change. So in the early days, we were, funding research, and we were convening people to start having serious conversations about what was happening in the climate and what the response ought to be. So we are known as a leader in this. And by the time I arrived at the foundation in 2001, we were really shifting so that all of our environment work was essentially going to be climate related. And now about 40% of all of our grant making worldwide is climate. So it's such a core for us that we just began to feel morally compromised and hypocritical, continuing to be invested in the fossil fuel industry. So we tried engagement. And in fact, we were very fortunate because half of our board are members of the Rockefeller family, that, the heirs to Exxon, the heirs to Standard Oil could, engage with the leadership at Exxon because of their reputation and their family history. And so there were conversations with the CEO of Exxon and a process of attempted engagement with zero results. And this even, garnered some public attention. There were news articles about this. There was, in fact, a fairly big story in the Financial Times. And the family filed shareholder resolutions during that period. And none of this engagement activity moved the needle one bit. And so that really compelled us to think more seriously about divestment, which we started to do in 2001. And as you said, we divested in 2014. So it took a process, it took a journey. And I'm happy to go into some of the details of that if people are interested. But the good news was that when we did announce our decision to divest in September of 2014, the day after the huge climate march in New York City, during Ban Ki-moon's climate summit at the UN, it became a huge global news story simply because it was the Rockefellers, divesting from the very source of their wealth. And it had outsized impact as a result. The investment impact was minimal because we're just not that big a part of the global economy, but the symbolic value of it was in fact outsized. And so it had I think a really positive impact on the whole movement, and I'm happy to describe some of the details of that as well. You're muted, Naomi.
I hear everyone here but me clearing my voice from my sinusitis. So I wonder, we wanting to do that at Stanford, right? Thinking that's a good step, which we'll talk further. Maybe that's not the most effective means of having influence for us. If you could go into some of the process that you went through that you think might inform what we might do or might not do.
Sure. And I also have been very actively involved, oddly enough, in an effort to get Harvard University to divest. I am not, as I said, a Harvard alum, but I have a number of friends who are, and Tim Worth is one of them. And Tim organized an effort at the very senior levels of Harvard to get Harvard divest. And he asked me to be part of it because of our experience. And so I joined with Tim, and I'm happy to talk a little bit about how that progressed. And Harvard finally did, in September of 2021, say that they were divesting from fossil fuels without actually using the word divesting, which was really amusing. But I can tell you a little bit about that whole process because it was a 3-year engagement, multi-dimensional engagement that I think helped lead to that decision. In our case, and maybe I might just show one screen if that's possible. Let's see if I can do that.
Bill, I think Bill has to give you permission.
Well,
or maybe Barbara has to.
It seems to be working. Are you seeing
Yes,
it?
we're seeing it. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Let's just do this. Okay, so this gives you a kind of quick view of all of the activities that we undertook in order to get to the divestment decision. So in 2005, we decided the best way to start, because we had a very traditional investment arrangement at the RBF with a firewall between, you know, the investments and the work of the foundation, which I just found illogical. So I decided to start a conversation with the investment committee and our investment managers around proxy voting, because proxies are in essence an economic asset, and we weren't being active about it. And I thought this is a good way to start educating my investment committee and my board about environmental, social, and governance issues with regard to investment. So we worked together and issued a very detailed set of proxy voting guidelines, which we then began to implement. In 2010, I convinced the board to set aside 10% of the endowment for impact investments. And our definition of impact investments are those that both return market rate financial returns, similar to what we would expect in any other investment, with the same risk profile of any other investment we would make, but also on top of that, deliver some measurable social or environmental benefit. And so we started by setting 10% of the endowment aside for that. We then found that we needed to hire a new investment manager. We have an outsourced CIO arrangement, and the one that we had before was a very good investor, but couldn't really manage what we wanted to do with impact investing. So we hired a new firm in 2014. They've been a fantastic partner. They're called Agility. And then we made the pledge to divest from fossil fuels. And we then re-engaged on proxy voting in 2015. We increased the target for impact investments because we exceeded the 10% target. We increased it to 20% in 2016. I won't go through all of these, but by 2019, we were pretty much completely divested from fossil fuels. And we did a 5-year study, which indicated that while being 99.7% fossil fuel free, the performance of our endowment still exceeded our benchmarks by more than 100 basis points. So the great story of our first 5 years was that we performed better probably not being in fossil fuels, and it was consistent with our mission, which is so much focused on climate. In 2020, we also adopted a gender and racial ethnic equity lens to our investing and set a target that we want 25% of our endowment to be managed by companies and managers that are led by people of color and women. And we're currently at, not doing very well. We're currently at about 12.3, but we are seriously working at this and hope to achieve 25% in the next few years.
You need to get more companies to hire people at that level.
Well, that's part of it. So in fact, that is a really good point, Naomi, because you asked about engagement, and one way of engaging is with the fossil fuel companies themselves, which proved to be not very satisfying. But the more satisfying engagement has actually been with the various fund managers with whom we are invested. And so we, through our CIO firm, have negotiated side letters with most of the fund managers about divestment. And that was one of the ways of getting them to change their investment profile and to decarbonize our endowment. And so that level of engagement is actually proven to be very good.
I mean, it's interesting because no academic institution, especially one like Stanford or Harvard or Yale, is going to want to lose money in their investments. They're not going to want to have a smaller endowment. They're competitive institutions, and they're very competitive about their endowments, right?
Exactly.
So finding lucrative alternatives seems to me to be critical if we're going to move on. And obviously fund managers aren't going to want to invest in something that's not going to be as fruitful. Was it difficult to to get them to look in a different direction?
It was in the beginning. It was, it was really challenging in our investment committee. It was challenging in our board, and it was challenging with our investment managers and fund managers because we were early in the process. But one of the things that helped was that through our grant making, we had been supporting a nonprofit organization based in the City of London called Carbon Tracker. And these are very smart folks who actually worked in investment firms in the city for many years and decided that they really wanted to try to change, the investment world with regard to fossil fuels. And they published a kind of a landmark study in around 2013, I think, in which they demonstrated very convincingly that the reserves of fossil fuels owned by the large fossil fuel companies were in not very long order going to become stranded assets and lose value and thereby bring down the value of those companies themselves. And so they were making the case with a lot of data that long-term investments in the fossil fuel companies are just simply bad investments. Whether you believe in climate change or not, they're economically, financially, just bad investments. And for long-term investors like institutions, like universities and foundation endowments, this is really important to keep in mind. So that really helped us get over the first hurdle of saying to people, this is against our values, it contradicts our grant making, and it's bad financial, economics. And that was very, very helpful.
Yeah, I mean, has the current climate influenced any of that in your dealings with fund managers? Given, obviously you're looking long-term,
Yeah.
but in the short term, fossil fuels are in demand.
Yes, that's right.
So
we just had a board meeting and we had a report from our investment committee and our outsourced CIO. And, the assumption is that in the near term, the fossil fuel companies are going to benefit from this chaos. But over the long term, they're actually going to lose, because what this is demonstrating, especially to the Europeans, but also to the rest of us, is that fossil fuels are not only a bad economic investment long-term, but they are bad for geopolitical stability. And of course, the history of fossil fuel, exploitation around the world, if you look at the countries that have those resources, they are countries that have had a lot of political instability or a lot of autocracy or both. And so we see the possibility that this is going to transform, for example, the energy market of Europe over time because of this experience. So short term, yes, it could look like a winner. Longer term, I think it looks like a bigger loser.
So when thinking about academic institutions, you and Bill and I discussed this, but our group has also discussed this that one of the obstacles in getting Stanford to divest, or thinking about it, is that many of these companies are supporting research or expansion or the university in other ways. Yeah. So if the university's fund is thinking about divesting, how does that affect the investments that they're putting in, probably for many political reasons, to the university? And was that the case at Harvard?
Very much so. I think that, in fact, I know we're recording this, but I hope well, I don't really care. I think that was the main issue, in fact. They always kind of hid behind this notion that, the endowment should not be used for quote unquote political purposes. And this was a statement that successive presidents of Harvard had made. And of course, we all said to them, yes, but you divested from South Africa and, a few other things. So you can't actually claim that you've never tried to align your endowment with major political, issues. But But when we really got into it, and the work with Harvard was a 3-year process. We had several meetings with President Bacow and the chair of the Harvard Corporation. We coordinated with faculty to get a faculty resolution adopted, which I think has not yet happened at Stanford. We worked with the students, so there was real coordination, high-level contact with the university with a very high-level group of Harvard alums. So we had Tim Worth and Bill McKibben, the founder of 350, and Gina McCarthy, the former EPA administrator, and Beavis Longstreth, who was a former commissioner of the SEC, and myself, the non-Harvard alum, meeting with top leadership in a series of meetings with a series of very direct letters that we made public. So there was public pressure, there was private pressure. We worked with the faculty, so there was faculty pressure. We worked with alums, we worked with students. So it was we were surrounding them with, with effort. And I think that was the crucial factor for success. But it was overcoming that point, and they never acknowledged that the research funding had any influence in their approach.
Of course not.
But a lot of people on the faculty confirmed that that was, of course, a concern.
How did this group get together, and how was it led? I mean, what was the catalyst there?
I have to say it was the energy and the passion of Senator Worth. I mean, he just is, and of course he was Undersecretary of the State Department for Global Affairs and was at the early climate conferences going back to Kyoto, and he's just passionate about this issue. And he, he's in retirement, and he made this his encore act, as it were. And he's just been tireless, and he kind of corralled all of us to be part of it, and he's still at it, and it's really quite terrific.
Because it seems to me that we would need someone or a couple of people like that to initiate that kind of effort and that momentum at Stanford.
Exactly.
How did you get involved? How did you get pulled in?
Well, Tim and I are old friends, and he was very excited about RBF's work on this and the early decision to divest, and kept speaking about it, as an example of what other institutions should be. And so he just dragged me into it. And of course, he didn't have to drag too hard. I was all too ready to participate.
You may get dragged to the West Coast.
Well, that would be fine.
Okay.
I do believe in kind of proselytizing, because this is a profound global crisis.
Yeah.
And we have to radically change the way we utilize energy, the way we finance energy. And at the end of the day, both at RBF and at Harvard, it actually is a question of institutional change. It's a change in mindset. It's a change in understanding your leadership responsibilities, especially for a big major research university, global,
Right.
One of the global top universities. This is a leadership challenge. And ultimately, when you make the institutional shift, it actually is a terrific motivator for all of your constituents.
Now, I'm going to ask a specific question, because our president, Tessier Levine, was also for a while president of Rockefeller University.
Exactly.
I don't know if I don't know if there's a way with that kind of background that he has to use that as a wedge in to him. I only know him from his time at Rockefeller, not his time at Stanford, but I don't know, is that a wedge in? I mean,
it's possible. It's possible. I know Mark, not very, very well, but because he was at Rockefeller University and we overlapped in that sense. And the family is good about networking the institutions that they have created over all these generations. And obviously he's a remarkable person. And but there might be a way to engage with him directly. And I could explore that with some family members who are closer to him than I am.
Yeah, I know, because I mean, my family were Rockefeller University family, which is how I know a little bit about his ties there. Now, and you talked about, the moral compromise that you realized you were making. And I think perhaps there's another opportunity for us here, because Stanford just launched a new school, and it's the first new school that they've had in forever. And it's about tackling climate change. And the stated goal is to create new knowledge and drive impact through its divisions, departments, institutes, initiatives, and create a sustainability accelerator. And so there's this big investment. Now, I wonder also who is behind this in terms of this investment, which I don't know, but maybe some of our group does know. But to go out there and make this kind of commitment, but still be invested in fossil fuels and not really engaging with those companies to make changes. I mean, is that another bit of leverage?
I think it is. I think it's another way of opening the conversation. And it fits in this larger concept that this is about institutional transformation, and you have to look at all the parts of the institution. So academically, the university has made this big commitment. And I know the university has also made important commitments in terms of university operations, how the university is, managed from an energy point of view and a sustainability point of view. And it's now time to align the investments as another, it's, what is it, 37 or 38 billion dollars in the Stanford endowment.
Right.
That's a significant position in the financial markets, and they should be aligned with the university's research mission and the university's values, which at this point, if we consider ourselves humanists, and if we consider ourselves part of the larger fabric of life on Earth, the climate crisis is the driving motivation for what we should be doing across all of our human activity.
Right. Of course, as my background in anthropology, I think about culturally in our country, how we've kind of isolated ourselves in many ways as individuals, and we've lost a greater sense of community. But universities try to foster a sense of community, and I guess I feel like maybe that's another way to feed in, to talk about it. We always talk about the Stanford community or the Harvard community, and it seems to me that's another access point. Also, influencers in these communities are always important. Who did you feel were the best allies at Harvard?
Well, certainly the students. I really give a lot of credit to the students, and they have used a variety of tools in this process, including joining up with the students at Yale, and during the Harvard-Yale game, launching a massive demonstration on the field, interrupting the game.
Yes.
And launching a massive demonstration on the field. 50 kids got arrested. It got obviously national coverage. I think it was even being televised. And so
they televise that game now. It's a shame. But.
Yeah, it was a great moment. And so I give the students a lot of credit, but I also give the faculty a lot of credit at Harvard. And that's a really important part of this. If you all have friends on the faculty and contacts, really trying to work with them to get the faculty behind this and to adopt the kind of resolution that the Faculty of Arts and Sciences at Harvard ultimately adopted. That was a big moment in the process. But then the other one was the influencers. So, having people like the little group that Tim Worth organized was very important. And so, you should think about, the influential alums from Stanford, people who are in government, people who have senior positions in business, people who have senior academic leadership positions, and reach out to them and try to organize a group of people that collectively, would get attention from the university administration.
Yeah, I mean, if one is concerned about climate change, there's a real sense of urgency. But if one's focus is not on that, and you're not in a position where you feel that urgency, there's a lot of convincing to be done. I mean, it's kind of easy to put blindfolds on. I mean, I worked in the last 3 years in Alaska, where if you're in the Arctic, there's no looking away from climate change, right? It's a
Exactly.
bellwether. If you're in lovely Palo Alto, maybe you can look away, although it's getting drier.
Yeah.
So there are those issues. Is another possibility partnership with other institutions? I know,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And especially this partnership among the students, and now the students at Stanford, Yale, Harvard, and
MIT is in there.
MIT have filed, this court suit to try to compel divestment. And they may not succeed legally, but it's another lever, and it will cause the universities to spend time and energy, defending against this suit. So, one could consider it a form of harassment, but that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
And, so I think being creative, I think culture, and also making this kind of fun and appealing is also very, very important. And that kind of activity on campus can be very important.
I'm a big fan of cheap tricks to a higher purpose. I mean, Bill mentioned Fat Bear Week, right? Which is what we at Cat might do at the end of the season, March Madness for bears. And people around the world get to pick their favorite fattest bear. But the real mission of that is to talk about the amazing healthy ecosystem that we have at the Brooks River, and how important it is to protect it. And we get to do that, and we get press coverage everywhere around the world because it's fun and it's engaging. But it's not going to be fun engaging without the salmon, without the clean water, without that healthy climate and ecosystem. So I agree, if there can be things in there that are engaging and fun for more people. I'm going to remind people that are here, if they have questions, to put them in the chat, because we're going to talk for a few more minutes, but then Bill's going to take over, and he's going to ask your questions to Stephen. So if things are occurring to you as we talk, please put them in the chat. So I'm trying to think, can you think of, so where do we start? I'm thinking that way. I mean, we have good intentions. We feel the urgency, but where do we start?
Yeah, well, if this group of alum want to really kind of focus on this, which I would really encourage, then I would suggest that you organize a session like this and bring in some of the student leaders and some of the faculty sympathizers, and maybe some of the folks from the New Climate School, and have this conversation about the current status of Stanford's policy and what each group is doing, kind of getting up to speed about what the student plans are and what the faculty plans are, to the extent there are any, and how those can be multiplied, strengthened, and advanced. And then also think about the high level contact directly with Mark and with other leadership in the university, so that all of these things begin to happen simultaneously in ways that are mutually reinforcing. I think that's the way to begin.
Yeah, I mean, I think about, like reminding mark of the RBF success story, right?
Yeah.
Because he has enormous pressure on him from many different directions to be fiscally responsible and successful.
Yeah.
So how does he execute all of his plans for the university, which all take money?
Yeah.
90% of them take money, and still have these other goals consistent, morally consistent
Exactly.
goals. So I think that's important too. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you feel you want to share?
I don't think so, except maybe one additional data point to show the momentum in this. When we announced our divestment decision, September 2014, we were, one of a small number of institutions with a total of about $50 billion in assets under management. So a very small segment of the global economy. But because we and others have been building a movement toward divestment and reinvestment in clean energy economy, we now have well over 1,000 major global institutions who have divested from a total of $15 trillion of assets under management. So this movement has just, grown exponentially since 2014. And it's kind of appalling, I would say even embarrassing, that the major global research universities are the laggards in this process. And I include Yale in it too. Yale is finally beginning to move, but it was a long, slow process. And they should have been part of the leadership cadre, but it's time for them to catch up.
Yeah. And also, obviously, this takes patience and tenacity.
Exactly. And that's why I showed that slide. We started our discussions in 2005, and it took us to 2014 before I could tee up the decision to divest.
Well, Stephen, it's a really great story, and I think your comments are inspiring and very helpful, and I think helping to give us some direction and some actionable ideas. And you'll be getting another call from us trying to enlist you to make this happen.
Well, I will volunteer, but I could offer you probably an even better volunteer, because my current board chair is also a Stanford alum.
Aha.
And she is terrific. Her name is Valerie Rockefeller, and she's the daughter of Senator Jay Rockefeller, former senator. And she's been our board chair for 9 years. She was chair during the divestment decision, and she's outstanding. And she's been a wonderful partner and does as much public speaking about this as I do. And I think she'd be very enthusiastic about joining an effort at Stanford.
That sounds great.
Good.
So I'm going to turn this back over to Bill to sort through the questions and pose them to you. So, Bill.
Thanks, Naomi.
Yeah, thank you very much, both of you. This has been very interesting. I've enjoyed the listening in, sort of the chance to be a fly on a wall of a very interesting discussion. I think it's been so effective. We haven't had many questions, which is a good thing or a bad thing, but I have a feeling people are just being quiet because there's a lot there. One thing I was curious about, as you were saying, the leader you had was very valuable. I'm thinking, I live in Oregon, and my senator is Ron Wyden, who was a grad from '71 from Stanford, and he's clearly a very strong climate advocate. So figuring ways of getting him involved. Of course, there's so much other things that are attracting his attention. Getting this would be a challenge, but then again, trying to have him lead into his alma mater would be a good idea.
It would, and in fact, Tim Worth also recruited Sheldon Whitehouse, Senator Whitehouse, who is a Harvard alum and is very passionate about climate. And his participation was episodic, which we all understood, but it was valuable.
Yeah.
So I think Ron Wyden is a great idea.
Yeah, and I think that what we now need to do, and one of the challenges I've had as we've tried to grow this small group, is to leverage the experience people have and contacts. It started out just as our class of 74, but it's now gone well beyond that with people from class of 66 up to 87.
Oh,
And
great.
we actually have one of the students, one of the leaders with Fossil Free Stanford is participating here, Chris Rowling. And so I have a feeling that the conversations that we've had here will be helpful for Chris to take back and for us to interact as the alumni and with the students.
Great.
So that's very interesting as well. I'm encouraged by that. I do have one question here. It's from Richard Burke. Has the fund measured how effective its divestment program has been on reducing fossil fuel projects?
Well, if you mean fossil fuel exploration or extraction, if that's the kind of project you're referring to, I think collectively yes, he says that is the kind of project. I think collectively the divestment movement, this 14 or 15 trillion dollars under management, have had an impact on slowing down the exploration and the extraction and the investment, because these are all huge CapEx undertakings. And you know, until recently, the majors were struggling. I mean, you know, Exxon went from, you know, extraordinary profit performance to major losses. And I think the movement has had an impact. It's not the only thing. You know, the market is more powerful than the movement, but the movement has moved the needle.
Yeah. Richard, do you want to have any sort of follow-up on that? Because you had asked the question.
Well, yeah, I think it's important for us to measure these things. Like, for example, now Exxon has to pay X% more in borrowing costs, or it had to cancel XYZ projects because it couldn't find funding or something along those lines. I mean, I hear a lot of people saying, "Oh, what good is that? What good is divestment?" Well, Bill Gates says it.
Yeah.
And of course, he's got a dog in the fight or two. But
Yeah.
But if we could get some tangible evidence, that would help promote this whole program.
No, you're absolutely right. So I would refer you to Carbon Tracker. Check them out on the web. They do a lot of very serious studies that are quite relevant to this, and you might find some useful material there.
Great. I did get Chris had asked about asking a question. If you want to unmute yourself, Chris, and ask your question. Chris is the leader of Fossil Free Stanford.
Excellent.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Reeling. I'm a senior at Stanford studying economics and computer science. And I was happy to be invited by Bill to the call today. And I wanted to ask, I'm one of the organizers that helped put together the complaint that we filed in February with the California Attorney General alleging that the investments are illegal under sort of nonprofit law. And we're working on sort of following that process through, but also looking at different ways to influence administration, the Board of Trustees. And one key thing that we've sort of honed in on is targeting the Board of Trustees, since they're the ones who, manage the endowment and are responsible for making those decisions and sort of delegating down to Stanford Management Company. However, in talking with people who are very familiar with endowment management at different universities, we've learned that effectively what happens is Stanford Management Company makes its own decisions that sort of, they say, hey, this is what we're thinking. And the Board of Trustees really relies on their assessment in order to enact policy from the top down. But one thing that we've heard is a large concern that's keeping the management company from divesting is the idea of losing independence and appearing manipulable by the Stanford community and students nonetheless, who are often seen as younger and less experienced. do you have any advice or thoughts on the idea of, this independent body that is meant to be a steward of Stanford's endowment that always has a lot of interest that people would like to be represented by that money, but it apparently they are amenable to divestment, but just don't want to appear like they could be shaken around by students and sort of relinquish that control. And
Yeah,
that's what we've heard from people familiar with the situation.
yeah, that's a very interesting point, Chris. And let me just take this opportunity to thank you for your leadership on campus, for leading this work, because I just think it's fundamentally important. And we, of course, experienced some of that at Harvard. At RBF, it's a different situation because we don't have an independent entity that is got the fiduciary responsibility for the endowment. Our board is ultimately responsible for that. But I would say that, the board does set the investment parameters. They are the client, and they instruct the management corporation around the kind of larger parameters about what their goals are with this endowment. Are they, how much of the endowment are they prepared to spend each year, or do they need to spend each year for university activities? What's their long-term investment objective? What is the asset allocation structure of the endowment? So these big policy questions are the responsibility of the Board of Trustees of the university. And I think, given the global urgency of this, that this rises to the level of being a major policy decision for the ultimate board. And I think that you got to keep applying the pressure on them. And if you can find, one or two trustees who are sympathetic. And, the other thing that happened at Harvard is that some climate activists mounted a petition campaign to become independent candidates for election to the Board of Trustees, to start putting some climate activists on the board, or at least climate sympathizers on the board. And that's something to consider too. That's a longer term process. It doesn't always succeed in the first go, but all of these different ways of creating attention and influence are really important. One thing is not going to work. It's going to be the assemblage and the collection of a variety of things. And that's what makes it complicated. And that's why you need lots of people involved. But I would say, find the trustees who are sympathetic and really energize them and support them.
Chris, also, I think there's the ethical question, right? Which the board has a say in, right? I mean, maybe the people managing the fund want to be independent. Maybe the board is saying they want the fund to be independent, but there are parameters, and there are ethical parameters that certainly the board can weigh in on. I mean, 100 years ago, I worked for several chairmen of Merrill Lynch, and those were the days of all the activism to get rid of investments in South Africa. So there, the board meetings faced those protests every time there was a board meeting. So I think that, and that's an ethical decision, an ethical parameter, and I think that can be another part of it. And that's
Absolutely.
not about independence, that's about ethics.
Absolutely. And in fact, at the press conference, when we announced our divestment decision, Archbishop Tutu joined us by video and made that case, made the analogy between the ethical responsibility of divesting from an apartheid state and the equivalent of the ethical decision to protect the planet and the future of life on Earth. And of course, it was hugely powerful. He was a remarkable person.
Yeah.
Well, this is really interesting at getting some of the questions coming in. It sounds like there's a lot of work that we have to do within Stanford. Part of it is looking, sort of reaching out to see what other people have done. And in full disclosure, it's my brother that I'm going to ask a question, because he is a Harvard grad and actively doing things with his alumni association there. So Jonathan.
Well, thanks very much for letting me be a fly on the wall. And Chris, I really applaud your efforts as an undergrad. I have a Yale MPPM degree as well, and have worked with Bill McKibben for 10 years on divestment. Here's a resource that you all have, and that's your 50th reunions, or your 45th reunions, or your 35th reunions. And what we know for our belated 50th reunion, COVID meant we couldn't have it last year. We've put together 3 climate change presentations. Bill McKibben is speaking, along with Mary Evelyn Tucker from the Yale Environmental School. And we have our alums who are actively involved in my class of 71, saying we would like participation among our classmates. And we've got 35 people now who are actively addressing climate change. So there's huge opportunities with your reunion classes. That's one asset you have. The other one is don't underestimate the power you as undergraduates have, because going back to 2015, Chloe Maxman, Ilana Cohen, et cetera, undergraduates got protests going on campus, which led the faculty to get involved, which led us alumni to get involved, which exactly as Stephen was saying, we did write-in campaigns to get Harvard alumni, climate change advocates on the board of the Harvard Alumni Association. So there's a great domino effect here. Tim Worth, his daughter, Kelsey Worth, is married to Sam Myers, who's an MD, PhD, Harvard School of Public Health officials. So you have multiple generations here. I just throw that out because I applaud what you're doing, and it's a long haul, but there are many ways to get different groups going. One last thing, Naomi, your point about having fun, absolutely. And that's part of what undergraduates enjoy doing. And that's part of why we have music and art and all sorts of things at our reunions and stuff, because who wants doom and gloom? What I think you young people, and we have 2 daughters in their 20s, they're concerned about the IPCC report. We have less than 8 years to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 50% of the 2005 level. And we're not getting there, nowhere close. So I think that's what you young undergraduates have the moral authority to push your faculty. I'll stop there, but I'm happy to share any information we have that we've done at Harvard and Yale divestment. I've been on the ground on both of those places.
Thank you, Jonathan. So I think what it really has come through for me for these discussions is that there are a lot of resources that are available, whether it's tapping into Ron Wyden as a class of 71, very well-connected person, or spouses or brothers or cousins of other alumni, and then working collectively, talking to the faculty, talking to the new faculty members of the new school. I've had conversations with about a half dozen of them. Every one of them is very supportive. As a matter of fact, later this afternoon, I'm talking to the director of the Hopkins Marine Station. It'll be a significant part of that. And I am very pleased that all the conversations I've had, whether it's in the science or the business school, have been very supportive. And so there are a lot of activities going on. And so, Chris, for the question that had been asked was, how do we as the alumni work with you? I'm not going to put you on the spot now, but it's a matter of capitalizing on the energy and location and enthusiasm and importance that you recognize of this issue to make sure we make a multi-pronged approach. So
yeah, exactly. And it has to, and the students have a super important role, as Jonathan also was reinforcing, and it needs to be obviously multi-year, and so the students have to recruit the younger students, you know, so that as the seniors leave campus, they are being followed in this work by the incoming classes and the upcoming classes. And that's a really important part of the continuity of this effort that is key to success, because it takes consistent and persistent effort.
Right. And the interesting thing about that is it means that as the seniors graduate and go off, and if it persists, then they are not simply students, they are now become the leaders. They become the ones that are making decisions, starting up new projects, new companies, new innovative things to solve these problems. So crossing that generational divide is critically important, because it's clear that it has to be all of us working together for the right ways.
Exactly.
Now, I've chaired many of these or host many of these discussions, and when it comes time to respect people's time and all, it's frustrating because the discussions are always good, but it is almost 11 o'clock for me here on the Pacific Coast. And I want to thank Naomi for pulling it together, and Stephen for you to be providing so much of this very interesting discussion. Do you have any final comments or anything?
Well, one other point, and you and Naomi and I talked about this a little bit in our prep call. Another asset that you have at Stanford is Professor Chris Fields, who's an ecologist. And I'm on the board of directors of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and the Academy last year launched a major national commission on accelerating climate change and climate policy change.
Yeah.
And Chris is one of the co-chairs. And I think looping him into this would be very important, because he will have now another national platform in which this case can be made in a very influential way that can, not only influence Stanford, but the universities across the country. So I think he could be an important part of your team.
Yeah.
But I just want to thank you. I want to thank Naomi in particular for inviting me to be part of this conversation and leading it. And Bill, thank you. It was a pleasure getting to know you, and all of you who are doing this work and who are interested. I really appreciate the fact that you would take time for this conversation today. And Chris, go get them.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of enthusiasm. All right.
Stephen, thank you so much for coming. And I think we have a discussion tomorrow, right, Bill?
Correct.
So this is a lot of food for thought, and we can roll up our sleeves tomorrow.
That's right. A lot of motivation as well.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much to
Thank you.
everybody who participated, and Stephen for a great hour. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Good luck, everybody.
Thank you.